Okay, quick game breakdown. Let's go. I play the Caracan, and we get the exchange variation. I develop my knights, and then I play G6. Now, the idea of this isn't just to develop this dark square bishop. It's also that I want to get this light square bishop outside of my pawn chain because I want to play E6. So this bishop wants to be outside of the pawn chain. White's played H3 to stop me from going to G4 square, which is the typical square for the bishop. So what this G6 move does is it allows me to safely bring the bishop outside, because if White were to ever capture, I can take back with a pawn. Now, you may think this looks ugly because you double the pawns, but it's a perfectly good way of playing. Masters play like this. You get big centre, you get the open G file for your rook to attack if they castle kingside, and you just develop your pieces. You can sit your knight in this E square where it's backed up by two pawns, and your king's perfectly happy in the middle here. It's a legit way of playing, a good way of playing. I've had good results with this. So White doesn't take, he doesn't want that, and I've given White a couple of opportunities to take and double my pawns. He doesn't do it, so now I decide to make the trade. But White decides to take with a pawn instead of the queen. I'm guessing they thought they were controlling more central squares, but the problem is these pawns are now both weak and they're going to become targets for me, which is exactly what I'm going to do. So I develop the bishop. We both castle our kings. My opponent correctly brings his rook to the only open file of the board. Rooks belong on open files. I played a6, which I'm not too happy with this move. It's a bit slow. I'm guessing I just wanted to, stop a piece from coming into b5, but it's a bit slow. I think something like rook c1 would have been better, which is what I now play. My opponent plays bishop f4, and I now start to maneuver this knight. I want to bring my knight here to f5, where it's going to add more pressure to this weak pawn. So knight to e8, and this comes with tempo because it releases this bishop, and together with this knight, I now have two attackers on the pawn. My opponent only one defender. So my opponent then retreats the bishop, wasting a tempo, and I begin to retreat. My opponent now retreats another piece, so my opponent is now passively defending this weak pawn. So I continue to build up pressure, and my opponent finally caves in and gives the pawn up. My opponent then allows me to trade, which opens their rook, but it has again created more weak pawns for me to target, and I now play rook to c6. The idea is I want to double my rooks on this c file. Again, this c file is the only open file on the board. Whenever you have one open file, it's very important who controls it. You want to double your rooks and even put your queen there as well. Put all your heavy artillery down those open files because that's going to be the most active part of the board. My opponent plays d4, weakening the c4 square, so I should play rook to c4 immediately. The idea is I can then put all my heavy artillery on the c file, like I said before, and if white was to ever take, I then get a pass pawn, which is going to win me the game. The problem is I didn't put my rook onto c4, I doubled my rooks, but this allowed white to come in and stubbornly prevent my activity down this c file. So I go about kicking that rook. I want to play b6, so I move my queen. My opponent doubles. I now defend this rook because if I was to play b6, white obviously has two attackers on this rook. So I defend the rook, and my opponent now plays queen d3, which again prevents me from playing b6 because this pawn is going to become weak at the end of lines after my opponent likely retreats. So I make some trades, and then I look for a queen trade. I'm a pawn up. It's not exactly winning, but I'd like to get the queens off the board. My opponent refuses. I insist, and then we get this trade. We both bring our kings into the center, and now this is actually losing for me because my opponent takes and I take, thinking this is equal, but it's not equal because white has a 3-on-2 here, and my king is offside. My king is out of the action. White's king is blocking me from coming in, so this is technically lost. If white was to just push these pawns and create a pass pawn, there's nothing I can do about it. My king can't get in the game. I'm going to have to come all this way round, and it's too slow. But white makes a mistake because he pushes this pawn and he allows me to get back into the game. So I make this trade, I come back, and white defends the pawn. But now I get into a position where I'm attacking this pawn and white's defending it. So I know that if I can stop these pawns from moving, white is going to be in a position called Zugzwang, which is a German word, which I'll explain in a minute. So I start to just slowly move my pawns and get to a position where white now has no more legal moves. White is forced to move this king. And this is common in king and pawn endgames. You get yourself into a position where white cannot move a pawn, and so they're forced to move their king. This is called Zugzwang, and it basically means when you force your opponent to make a bad move because they can't do anything else. His only legal move is to move the king, and once he moves the king, it allows me to take the pawn, and then my opponent resigns in this position because I have two passed pawns, and he's not going to be able to stop them.